What do you find scary?
Rats.
Dentists.
The dark.
Dark rooms, spiders, and unfulfilled potential.
There's one chap in particular, no matter what I do when I'm in goal, I try to get out of the way, but he seems to hit me every time, and oh boy does it sting. So every time I see him raise his foot ready for a shot, it really scares me.
Blood.
Deadlines.
I hate zombies.
Spiders.
The grave.
Pineapple on pizza.
Going home before the end of a night out.
Wasps.
Clowns.
Public speaking and all of my friends turning against me. I'm scared of walking home alone in the dark and of spiders and not doing what I want to do with my life.
I'm scared of rejection, the unknown, and dying.
Spiders. Failure. Getting lost.
Amelia.
Welcome to the very first episode of Psych Soc O'Clock, the University of Glasgow Psychology Society podcast. We are Amelia Hilton,
Kati,
and Emma Strang,
and we're your hosts this month. This month we're going to be focusing on the spooky side of psychology, looking at all things Halloweeny, discussing everything from costumes to scary research practices to fear itself. But before we scare you away, we need to thank all the university students who answered the campus chat question this week. What do you find scary? From their answers, you can see there are a huge variety of things which can give us goosebumps. What scares you both? What do you find scary?
When I was little, I used to be afraid of clowns, so the film, when It came out, oh my goodness, no, couldn't go to it, was terrified. But I've slightly got over it now.
Okay, that's good.
That's good. Yeah, I'm just scared of, murderers, with those masks. Because I watched the horror movie Halloween when I was really small, which might have been a mistake. So I was just scared of, masked people who kill others.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think
Common one.
I'm really scared of flies, which I know is a bit of a weird fear.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I read this thing when I was younger that they have, over 2 million germs on them and that they poo on food when they land on it.
No, you can
yeah, I know.
Okay, now I'm scared too.
Not great. Hopefully talking under time pressure doesn't scare you both, because now we're going to move on to the segment which is Speedy Studies. We've condensed down some studies and concepts into little summaries for you all listening. Emma, do you want to go first?
With Halloween approaching and all the new horror films being released, the question remains why people love horror so much and what is the psychology behind fear itself. Psychologist Glenn D. Walters suggests that there are three main factors that feed the attraction to horror. The first is tension, which is followed by relevance, which could be universal, cultural or personal relevance. The final factor is unrealism, with viewers identifying that what they are watching is fake and also realising they are in a safe environment. So, what are the biological reactions to fear? Fear triggers what many of us know as the fight or flight response, which is caused by an increase in adrenaline, endorphins and dopamine. After the physical reactions wear off, we are left with an intense relief. These positive feelings intensify and leave the brain with feel-good chemicals, which is referred to as the excitation transfer. From a psychology perspective, a meta-analysis by Hoffner and Levine showed there are a few theories to explain the love of horror. The first was the excitation transfer. Further results were related to individual empathy, suggesting those who are less empathetic enjoy horror more. Finally, research suggests that those who enjoy horror movies are sensation-seeking. The reasons behind fear are complex. However, the brain seems to enjoy being scared as long as it's just on the screen.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, great. Now, Leah, do you want to talk about another type of fear, which is not screen-based?
Sure, I will. So, I'm sure you've all been in that situation. You're in your room and suddenly this little creature comes out of the corner and you scream and jump and run away. But why are so many people scared of spiders and also of snakes? So, Seligman in 1970 suggested that aversions against possible threats could be more easily acquired as a phylogenetically mediated behavior so that you're prepared, because when we weren't living in houses and stuff, we had to watch out for possible threats in nature, and that is spiders and snakes. Ullmann et al. In 1994 said that physiological responses can be acquired even if the images are masked, so not presented into the direct field of attention. So potentially dangerous stimuli, as we said, could be spiders or snakes, or processed differently from others. It was also found in a study that stimuli like pictures of snakes, spiders, and angry faces are preferentially attended to. That study was also by Oman and Mcleod in 2001. It was also found in a study by Uman and Mcleod in 2001 that stimuli like pictures of snakes and spiders, which we already talked about, and also angry faces are preferentially attended to, so they are attended to first than pictures that do not pose a threat. So maybe it could be an evolutionarily trained fear, as spiders as well as snakes, and maybe angry faces as well are likely to be a threat. So humans and non-human animals respond to images of snakes more quickly than to those, for example, of flowers and mushrooms. That was actually a study by Lip in 2006. Also, fun fact, there is a Japanese monkey species that reacts strongly to images of snakes, but not at all to those of spiders or flowers. So there are also animals in this world who are not as much cowards as we are. Thank you.
I always found that really interesting because I'm not quite sure what the research is. I'll link it into the description when I find it at the end of the podcast. That explains how the more evolutionary fears are so ingrained in humans in a way that fears like flying in an aeroplane, which is actually really dangerous, or being in a car just don't match because our brains haven't caught up to the danger of those kind of things because they weren't around when we were.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Just goes so quickly.
Right, my one is about the woman with no fear.
Completely opposite then.
Yeah. This is about a 2011 study by Feinstein. His patient, named SM, appears able to experience emotions like happiness and sadness normally, but shows no signs of fear. SM suffers from a rare genetic condition called Urbach-Wiethe disease, which caused part of her brain to harden and waste away, including the amygdala, which is associated with emotion. The interesting thing is she understands the concept of fear, but has trouble recognising fear in other people and doesn't seem to feel it herself. Although she remembers being afraid of the dark as a young child, this might have been because this was before the disease reached her amygdala and caused it to harden. She claims to hate snakes and spiders, which are things which normally induce fear in people, but when visiting a pet shop store, she wanted to touch all of the animals and was so enthusiastic about touching the animals that she was actually told to stop because it was dangerous for her to pet certain snakes.
Oh, God.
She responded to happy and disgusting film clips normally, but showed no response to scary film clips. She stated she knew most people would probably be scared of the films, but said she felt nothing herself, which shows she understands what people would find scary. She kept an emotion diary and reported feeling every basic emotion over the time she wrote the diary, other than fear. Even her own children don't remember any occasion where she seemed scared. She has been held at knife point and calmly told the man who held her at knife point that a choir was walking towards her, which helped her escape, and then went back to the same park where it happened the very next day. And she's actually lived through lots and lots of really scary situations. She's been held at knife point, gunpoint. She was once physically accosted by a woman who was twice her size. She was nearly killed in an act of domestic violence, and on more than one occasion she has been explicitly threatened with death. In most of these situations, people would be scared and call the police, but she didn't react with fear, but with kind of a calm calculation. However, not everyone is so sure that this research is all that accurate, because Elizabeth Phelps, who studies emotion at New York University, says her team have worked with patients whose amygdala are also severely damaged, and although they have trouble recognising fear in others, like SM, they all feel fear in their normal lives, which was assessed with the same kind of diaries used for SM. So yeah, it's a really interesting case.
Oh, wow. Imagine you had no fear.
Yeah, I know. Although fear is useful, like it shows with the knife point and gunpoint thing.
She probably has a shorter life expectancy, no? Because if you don't feel like pain, for instance, you have a shortened life expectancy. So I wonder if it's the same for fear, because you don't have that reaction to get yourself out of situations as much.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure, but yeah.
True.
segment, we try to apply psychological research and theory to things going on in the real world. Well, pop culture. You can decide if it counts. So I'm firstly going to talk about cultural appropriation. It's that time of year again, trying to decide the perfect Halloween costume. There'll be various costumes ranging from scary to hilarious. There is a good chance you may also see cultural appropriation. We've all seen the guy who's wearing a sombrero, poncho and fake moustache attempting to look Mexican. Such mimicry is now under debate as to whether this is cultural appropriation or just a Halloween costume and we should all lighten up. The question many ask is how precisely do we define cultural appropriation? What exactly is wrong with dressing up as something considered culturally inappropriate? Well, cultural appropriation is deemed as taking things from a culture that is not your own and appearing to disrespect this. This is seen as harmful because someone else is borrowing another person's culture, which is usually that of a minority group. Many may dress as a geisha, ghetto woman or Navajo princess. Many people say it's just a joke. However, what is the white equivalent? How many people dress up as a white man or white woman at Halloween? These costumes perpetuate harmful stigmas, which in turn propagates racist attitudes. Most people probably don't mean to cause offence, but it has been found that cultural appropriation can cause low self-esteem and result in internal conflict between an individual's identity and the self-fulfilling prophecies of that cultural stereotype. A campaign run by Ohio University in 2011 highlighted the importance of understanding how wearing an inappropriate costume at Halloween can have a negative impact. The poster read, "You wear a costume for one night, I wear that stigma for life." Despite all this, some argue culture is meant to be stolen to allow us to develop and appreciate one another. Many argue that people are being oversensitive. Are the people from these cultures actually offended by cultural appropriation? It appears that cultural appropriation is a desert which we have to be careful to not cross the lines drawn in the sand. I think when looking for that perfect Halloween costume, to just be mindful of others' cultures to help promote respect inside and out of those cultures.
Some of the most offensive costumes we found when researching this episode were historically insensitive, an Anne Frank costume, culturally insensitive, an American Indian seductress, misogynistic, droopers, so Hooters costume with saggy boobs, or the worst of all worlds, white couple who used blackface makeup and went as Chris Brown and Rihanna covered in bruises.
Although people might say it's just a joke, there are psychological effects of cultural appropriation. Are American Indian mascots a positive way to honour and include American Indians who have been historically excluded from American culture, or a harmful and negative stereotyping of American Indians? How do they affect the audience and the people being stereotypically represented? Take the stereotype of American Indians in the United States. In a set of 4 studies by Freiberg et al. Named "Of Warrior Chiefs and Indian Princesses, the Psychological Consequences of American Indian Mascots," researchers looked at how these stereotypes affect American Indians and Caucasian white Americans. So, there is an effect on the audience or the non-target group. Researchers discussed how stereotypes are cognitive tools that people use to form impressions of others, and these are especially powerful when the target group is unfamiliar. Many Caucasian Americans do not frequently interact with American Indians, so these stereotypes have an important impact on their overall impression of American Indians. The stereotypical representations of American Indians provided by mascot figures are frequently and consistently associated with a handful of traits, images, or behavioural tendencies. This causes powerful, hard-to-break mental links, or stereotypes, to form in the minds of American public for the social category of American Indian. Not only does this have a negative effect on how the non-target group view the target group itself is often affected. Negative effects on a target group for both negatively and positively associated stereotypes occur. So that is whether a stereotype is represented in a seemingly positive way, such as Pocahontas, or a mascot which draws people who support a sports team together, or in a negative way, such as making fun of a stereotypically spiritual American Indian in a TV show or movie. Cole et al. In 2007 found when negative stereotypes are present in the classroom, students perform less well on tests. Stone and McWhinney in 2008 found when stereotypes are present in sports, athletic performance is worse for the minority groups. Goff, Steele and Davies in 2008 also found that interpersonal relations are affected by negative stereotypes. When a negative stereotype was activated, European Americans sat further away from their minority conversation partner. But what about positive representations which are still stereotypical? In the first experiment I talked about, researchers looked at how students who identified as American Indian reacted to seeing American Indian mascots and other representations of American Indians. When shown mascots such as Chief Wahoo, as well as other characters like Pocahontas, the students generated positive associations, so that shows that they understand it's a semi-positive representation. But they reported a depressed state of self-esteem, community worth, and fewer achievement-related possible selves, which are images of the self that one hopes to become. These are important in motivating sustained goal-directed behaviour and are also important for goal attainment. Researchers suggest American Indian mascots are harmful because they remind American Indians of the limited ways that others see them. This relates to Moscovici, 1998, and his social representation theory, which states social representation helps individuals make sense of their past, present, and future by providing a shared language. So, these limited representations, especially when considering underrepresentation of actual American Indians in the media, constrain how they see themselves. This is a quote from the paper. Negative effects of exposure to these positive stereotypes may, in part, be due to relative absence of more contemporary positive images of American Indians in American society. Specifically, American Indian mascots and other common American Indian representations do not cue associations that are relevant or useful for students' identity construction. End quote. Social identity theory states that individuals define themselves and others in reference to their social categories. Building on this and social representational theory, the research suggests trying to define ourselves outside of common social representations and the shared social reality that they generate is incredibly difficult, even if these representations are positive. The researchers use the example of an American Indian university student who wants to be recognised as a good student. However, if others in the university think about American Indians using images from sports rituals and those represented to have spiritual powers in Hollywood films, then this student will have a really hard time constructing and maintaining a good student identity outside of this stereotypical representation. The implications of this extend beyond representation of American Indians to all stereotypical representations of ethnic minority cultures and societal groups, whether they are displayed by Halloween costumes or by characters in the media.
Keeping all this in mind, dress as best you can this Halloween, but don't have fun at someone else's expense. We hope you've had a spooktacular time listening to the very first Psych Soc O'Clock. We will give references for all of the studies mentioned in the description. We have been Leah Kati,
Emma Strang,
and Amelia Hilton.
With special thanks to the School of Critical Studies for providing the recording facilities and Sonia Killman for composing and producing the original music for this podcast.
Wishing you a night full of frights and a bag of delights. This podcast was created for the University of Glasgow Psychology Society, recorded in the University of Glasgow Critical Studies building, written by Amelia Hilton, Emma Strang and Leah Kati, produced by Amelia Hilton and edited by Imogen Mcleod, with original music composed by Sonia Killman.